everyone. I welcome you all to my YouTube channel, The Teacher Girls. In this video, we will continue with Indian Polity M Laxmikant Chapter 1 Historical Background, and we will talk about Indian Council Act of 1892. So before understanding the Indian Council Act of 1892, let us understand what was the background or what were the background events that took place and which led to the passing of Indian Council Act of 1892. So as we all know that Indian National Congress was formed in 1885, and it was the common platform for all the Indian nationalists to deliberate upon what they wanted for their country. So they did not like the changes made in 1861, and therefore they put forth their own demands that were to some extent considered in Indian Council Act of 1892. So let us look at what were the demands that were put forward by Indian National Congress. So the first demand was that additional member in central legislature is to be increased, and second one was that the process of choosing additional member is to be the nomination and not the is to be the election and not the nomination. They wanted election to happen for electing the additional members. And third one was that, as we know that earlier there could be some members who could be the part of non-additional members, non-official ones, but they were not allowed to discuss the financial matters. So it was through this act that they wanted that discussion on financial matters to be allowed. And the fourth one was that they wanted that military expenditure is to be reduced. As we all know that Britishers were indulging in a lot of wars, and that involved the expenses of India. So they wanted that military expenditure to be reduced, and they also wanted the civil servants who work for India. The process for this selection, that is civil service examination, should be held both in India and England. Now, let us look at once at what we read in Indian Council Act of 1861 that we read the last time. So as we all know that in Indian Council Act of 1861, Indians were given more representation. They were being associated to Executive Council. So an Executive Council was formed, and as we remember that there were portfolios which were given to different ministers, and there was public work department and etc. And Viceroy could issue an ordinance which could last for 6 months in time of emergency. He was given the supreme power, because in this case he can himself give an ordinance. So this all happened in Indian Council Act of 1861. Now let's in that Indian Council Act of 1861, let's talk about central legislature. So as we know that central legislature consisted of Viceroy and the Executive Council, and that Executive Council will consist of members who were official and some were non-official, and this official will always be in majority. So indirectly Britishers were in majority, and the additional members could be from 6 to 12. So this was the limit set by Indian Council Act of 1861. So now let us understand what was the feature of this Indian Council Act of 1892. So now the first one is that through this act there was an increase in the number of additional non-official members in central and provincial legislative council, but the official majority was maintained in them. Let's see how official majority was maintained. So as we know that now additional members could be 10 to 16. So official members will be 6 and non-official will be 10. Now this non-official, which earlier through Indian Council Act of 1861 was appointed solely by Viceroy, could now be appointed both by Viceroy and Provincial Assembly of Bengal, Madras and Bombay. So 5 members will be appointed by Viceroy and 5 will be appointed by Provincial Assembly of Bengal, Bombay and Madras out of 10 non-official members. So now we might think that there are non-official members which are 10 and official members are 6. So it could be said that we Indians were in majority in Executive Council, but no. Why not? Because there was a provision that executive and official has always to be greater than non-official members in the executive council. Now, the second provision was that it increased the function of legislative council and gave them the power of discussing the budget and addressing questions to the executive. So now Indians could address their questions to the executive, but there were some limitations. For example, now question could be asked, but you have to give 6 days notice prior to that specific person, and then you can ask your questions. And once you asked the question and the answer is given, you cannot supplement your question, means you cannot ask another question. And also voting was still not allowed. So you could be the part of the discussion, but voting was not allowed. And Indians were not allowed in executive council. Indian could only be the additional members. This thing was there. And other than that, the next provision was of Indian Council Act of 1892 was that additional member of provincial legislature could be chosen from various fields. They could be chosen from universities and district boards, trade associations, zamindars and chambers. So provincial legislative council could be chosen on the recommendation of these different bodies. So we understand this was all about Indian Council Act of 1892. So let us understand what were the significance of this act. So the first one was that through this way, more and more Indians were making their way to central and provincial legislature. So as we know that earlier there was a limit through Indian Council Act of 1861, and before that there was no Indian representation at all. So it was through this act that there was an increase in the number who could make it to the central and provincial legislature. The second one is that it gave the indirect provision for the use of election. Though the term election was not officially used through this act, but the process was described as nomination made on the recommendation of certain bodies. But this was actually a limited and indirect provision for the use of election. It was there. So this was used for filling up both non-official seats in central and provincial legislative council. So there was an indirect election involved in this process. Second one was that through this act, INC, Indian National Congress, reaffirmed its importance. Why? Because it was through its recommendation that Britishers considered some of the provisions that were put forward by Indian National Congress, and to some extent they did listen to our demands and fulfilled some of them. So this was all about Indian National Council. And the last one was that it was the first representative act. So as we know that it was the act through which the provision was made that the provincial legislative council could council's members could be chosen by the governor on the recommendation of district board, municipalities, universities, trade associations, zamindars and traders. So it was for the first time that such a wide representation was included, and it was giving wide representation to people across different fields. So this is it about Indian Council Act of 1892. I hope you liked this video. If you like this video, please share and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Teacher Girls. Thank you.